Tick tock, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to all the Christians, the Muslims, the Jews, the atheists, the agnostics, the Hindus, the Buddhists, and yes, even you followers of Malachi Z. York who are watching all around the world. I am your host, your friendly neighborhood philosopher, David Wood. But with me now is your other friendly neighborhood philosopher who goes by Inspiring Philosophy. That's his channel if you haven't seen it. He's got well over 100,000 subscribers, and his real name's Michael Jones. So, Michael, how you doing?
Good. I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we've mentioned this before, but how do you not go by Mike Jones?
Who?
You don't know Mike? How do you not go by the name Mike Jones if your name's Michael?
Who?
Oh, he's doing it right. Oh, you got me there.
Yeah. No.
Okay, so you do know, yeah.
I do, yeah, but that's not my name. My
For
name
those
is Michael.
for those of you who don't know what just happened, it's Mike Jones. Who? Mike Jones. Who? Mike Jones. So, all right, so you know that one. Couldn't catch you off guard there. All right, why don't you tell everyone? By the way, I see everyone with the badges and the emojis over there, so that's cool. This is the first time we've actually had an opportunity for people to use them, and I just wanted to make sure they work and stuff like that. But yeah, good to see all those over there, and good to see the badges. Looks like this could be fun. But you can only start off with 4, but now I can have I've added a couple, and I can add more. So guys, if you think of anything else you'd like to have in custom emojis, go ahead and let me know. Send me a message, and I can have those made up. All right, IP. What should I call you, by the way? Mike Jones, Mike, Mr. Jones, IP. IP sounds like I'm going to urinate or something like that. But I normally
You can call me Mike. You can call me Mike for tonight. That's fine.
Mike Jones. All right. You're one of the pioneers of the YouTube apologetics. So why don't you tell everyone a little bit before we get started on the moral argument? That's what we're going to be discussing tonight, everyone. But before we get started on that, I want to tell everyone a little bit about what you do over on your channel.
Sure. Yeah. To call me a pioneer when I'm on your channel and you've been here forever is kind of strange.
I said you're one of the pioneers. You've been doing this for a while.
I've been doing it for about 7 years now. So on my channel, I do a lot of different videos to defend Christianity. I argue for God's existence. I talk about quantum mechanics in relation to that. I have a whole series on morality, talking about the different views against objective morality and critiquing them. I have some videos on the moral argument. I got a whole series on Genesis, the resurrection, New Testament. And you don't really see my face on my videos. That's rare. In fact, it never happens. It's all graphic-driven videos. Basically, a lot more like that.
By the way, if you had told me 7 years ago, if you were getting started, and if you said, "Hey, I'm going to make these videos, and it's just I'm not even going to be on the screen. It's just going to be a bunch of graphics up on the screen, and you're going to hear my voice," I'd have been like, "Dude, that is YouTube suicide. That's YouTubeicide. It'll never work in a million years. Never work in a million years." And yet you've amassed millions and millions of views using that. So shows how much I know.
Well, it's not PowerPoint presentations. I really try to put a lot of work into getting the graphics to look right and making it a little bit more interesting, more professional looking. Mm-hmm. So that's why I think people kind of are like something new like that. It's a little different.
Mm-hmm. All right, so we are here, and guys, so when we're laying these out, I'm going to look for any comments that are sort of on the topic that we're addressing here, because we want to get through at least the gist and some specific formulations of what's called the moral argument. So we'll be focusing on that, and then we'll get to comments later, unless I see something along the, as we're going through, if I see something that's directly related to what we're saying right now, I'll try to pull that up so we can respond. Also, Mike, if you see something in the chat that you want to address, feel free to, stop and address something like that anytime you want. But so why don't you give us a basic idea of what moral arguments are like, and then I'll go ahead and put Craig's formulation up on the screen, and then we'll put some more specific formulations that we use up there as well.
Right. So the moral argument is basically saying that if morality is objective, if there really are objective moral values and duties, the best way to ground them would be in a God. That's basically it in a nutshell. And a lot of atheists or Christians can kind of confuse terminology. You'll see them say, well, I don't need God to be a good person. And that's not the moral argument. The moral argument is not the nature of morality. It's not normative ethics. It's not what we ought to do. It's specifically about something called moral ontology. How do we ground moral values and duties? And so the basic form of the argument you see with Craig's a lot is what you're about to put up, is if moral facts and duties, or if moral values and duties.
Matter of fact, I'll go ahead and put that up real quick.
Throw it up, yeah.
Let's see. All right, so Craig's formulation. Premise 1, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. But objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. And I see some. Let me see. Let me pull up a comment real quick. Tippy Bear says, "Is this geared towards atheists?" Well, the moral argument is something that everyone needs to take into consideration. But the argument is, if it succeeds, it's a problem for atheists. It's a problem for atheists because it undermines their worldview. But no, Christians should be very interested in this argument. Muslims, Jews should be very interested in this argument. Whatever your worldview is, you should be interested in what exactly it is that makes right things right and wrong things wrong. So that's the yeah. So go ahead and continue.
So I would say about this is this. I'll first say things I like about Craig's argument. For one thing, it really sort of puts the people who object to this in two categories. Because typically what you get from the atheist community is they'll either object to one of these two premises, and they'll accept the other one. So some atheists will just object to the second premise, and they'll say, well, moral values and duties do not exist. I'm a cultural relativist. I'm a non-cognitivist.
That's called biting the bullet on that one, right?
Right, yeah. And so they'll take one of the other views, like J.L. Mackey's error theory view. Maybe they'll take a non-cognitivist view or something like that. They'll just object to it right out. The second group is someone maybe you would say like Sam Harris, although he's a natural moral realist. He thinks he can ground moral values and duties in something natural. And they'll say, well, sure, there are objective moral values and duties, but it doesn't imply God. And they'll try to argue that, well, how would it imply a theistic God? How would you get there? And so that's one thing I like about Craig's argument is it really gets the atheists into the two different groups of how they argue this.
And that's the benefit of having two premises and a conclusion. By the way, so just so everyone understands, the logic here is the logical form is called modus tollens. That's indisputable from a logic perspective. So the conclusion would have to follow if the first two premises are true. If those two claims are true, premise 1 and premise 2, then the conclusion has to be true, in which case God would exist. So if you don't believe in God, you have to reject one or both of these premises. So you either have to say, as Mike pointed out, that objective moral values and duties don't exist, but I said that you have to bite the bullet on that one, because notice, if you say that, atheists kind of forfeit a lot of their other arguments, right? They want to complain about Christians, or they want to complain, well, God should have done this, and it's immoral to do this. But if you don't think that objective moral values and duties even exist, then you have no real ground to stand on if you want to toss accusations around. From my experience, atheists want to throw a lot of accusations around, and so they kind of need that.
Let me add to that. It's interesting because they also claim, the God of the Old Testament is immoral. Well, I mean, here's a bomb for some people. Christianity could be true and moral values and duties could not exist. Maybe they're just God's opinions. There are some philosophers who take that kind of view, that it's just sort of whatever God decides. So if you reject objective moral values and duties, you really can't critique the God of the Old Testament, because there is no standard for him to hold to on that view. Now, I don't take that view, obviously. I'm just pointing out the obvious here, that when atheists attack Christianity, and they also are moral subjectivists or moral relativists, they actually kind of shoot themselves in the foot.
And Theology Insights here put the third option, or you have to reject logic. That is true. That is, but that one's actually hilarious, because you could take that route. So notice, if you reject premise 2, you have to throw all of your moral claims out the window. All of your complaints about anyone doing anything horrible, you have to throw this out the window. You can't say that Hitler was really wrong. You just can say, you don't like what Hitler did, and it's your personal preference, and you like vanilla ice cream, and you don't like Hitler. It's all just a matter of taste preference. But Theology Insights pointed, or you have to reject logic. You can bite that bullet too and say I'm throwing logic out the window, but then you're throwing all reasoning at all out the window, right? You can never formulate an argument for or against any position because you've thrown it out. But you're right, that is a possibility here. So the other possibility would be to reject premise one and say that no, objective moral values and duties do not. You could say objective moral values and duties can exist without God.
Without God, yeah. Now, this is one of the things I will say I don't like about Craig's argument here, because as some atheists have responded, if they look at the first premise and they will be moral realists, like the guys over at Real Theology, a podcast. They say, okay, well, look, we accept the second premise, but we look at the first premise and go, okay, if God does not exist, then objective moral values and duties do not exist. And they go, well, how does that work? Where they argue that sounds more like a non sequitur. How does it get to God? And so when on my channel, I have 2 videos on the moral argument, and I sort of formulated my own version of the moral argument to sort of explain why objective moral values and duties necessarily imply a theistic worldview. And so, not to be fair, Craig does defend the first premise far more in his books. I just think when people see this basic argument, they don't really, they kind of look at the first premise and they just feel like it's a non sequitur.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, by the way, that's why I would look for a kind of different formulation. In fact, I'd be perfectly happy using it as an argument against naturalism. Just saying, hey, this rules out naturalism. So some sort of supernatural view is going to be on the table. Whatever it is that grounds, which grounds moral truths. Only those views are going to be open as far as what's consistent with this, and then to sort of look for which one of those views is actually confirmed by more evidence. So anyway, guys, that's one form, a very popular form of the. I'm sorry, what? hang on. I'm sorry, I'm looking at a comment. Jackie said, I heard AP. That's the apostate prophet is now a follower of Christ. Is this true, David Wood? Not that I've heard. I assume that I would be one of the first people he would contact if something like that were true. So I'm going to say, not that I know of. It would be awesome, but not that I know of. So anyway, now we have. So that's kind of a general gist. And guys, if the problem isn't clear, think about this, right? So the vast majority of us tend to think that certain things are really right and other things are morally wrong, and that we have obligations, moral obligations, genuine ones, not just our feelings. We genuinely have to do certain things, and we shouldn't do other things. And even people who claim to be moral relativists actually aren't, right? If you walk up and smack them in the mouth, it won't just be, hey, I don't like that. They will actually think that you did something wrong. If you take their property, then they actually believe that you did something wrong, even though at an intellectual level they're claiming that they don't believe that. And I'm saying this from personal experience. I was an atheist until I was 20 years old. I utterly despise the idea that anything is really right or really wrong. And yet when anyone would do anything to me, I wanted to destroy them and destroy their families for the horrible thing that they did. So deep down, it's kind of built into us. But if you're an atheist or naturalist, you only have a couple of options where you're going. You can say that it's sort of hardwired into us, right? It's sort of wired into us that we're just wired a certain way, and that's what grounds our moral views. But if you say that, notice that doesn't really tell you if anything is objectively right or wrong. It just tells you how you're wired, right? Like a lion who moves into a new pride of lions will kill off all the babies in that pride. It's wired to do that. It will just kill them all off to make room for its own offspring. You wouldn't say, well, since it's wired to do that, therefore it's morally right to kill off a bunch of little lion cubs. you wouldn't say that had anything to do with morality. So if we're just wired to do certain things, we're wired to have a kind of herd instinct, or maybe to care for, injured people or something like that. It's got nothing to do with actual objective morality. You're just saying we're wired to do certain things. The other way is you could ground it in society and say, well, what my society teaches is right, is what's right. So you see any problems with that? Mike?
Yeah, that's called cultural relativism in the philosophical world, and there's a lot of problems with that. One of my favorite ones is a couple. One of my favorite arguments is that how does that work? What if a man from culture A has sex with a woman from culture B and culture C? By which culture do you judge them by? Another problem is the issue of moral reformers. According to cultural relativism, people like Jesus or Martin Luther King Jr. would be evil because they went against the cultural moral values of their time. And so it's filled with so many illogical errors. I mean, you can't define where a culture begins and ends. If a family from the Middle East moves to the United States, what culture are they judged by? Where are the guidelines? And if you're going to set these objective guidelines for where the cultures begin and end, well, then you're creating objective standards. Mm-hmm. So it kind of is just ridiculous view. It kind of shoots itself in the foot.
Yeah, and guys, there are lots of examples you can think of here, but there are cultures where if your sister walks down the street without you or her father accompanying her, you beat her to death, strangle her, set her on fire, and a lot of these guys will, after they do that, will just walk into the police station, turn themselves in, say, yep, I did it, but I didn't do anything wrong because she dishonored my family. And that would be completely normal in that culture. Most people would want to say, hey, there's something wrong with that. But if cultural relativism is true, there's nothing really wrong with it. You're just from a different culture, and they do something over there that you don't like. So the question is one cultural position on that issue actually better? If it is, if you can say no, a culture that doesn't do that, at least with regards to that, would be better than a culture that beats girls to death for walking down the street without a male escort. So if you think that something is actually better than the other, morally better, not just your opinion, then guess what? Congratulations, you're not a cultural relativist here. Wanted to address one quick comment here. Who said, he who wins a war is always historically right. He who wins a war is always historically right.
Okay, so then when the Mongols won all their wars and they used people as meat shields, the people they captured, was that right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's an interesting case.
Yeah, I think this is one of those situations where people got things that they like to say, and if they actually thought through it, would realize it's utter absurdity.
Yeah. Someone asked in the chat, yes, I am drinking whiskey. This is an Oban special. It is the Game of Thrones Oban special.
Well, now here you go. Here was the question. He said, "Are you drinking whiskey?"
Yes. Yes, I am. I'm drinking the Night's Watch special.
This could actually be interesting if you have like 12 more glasses of that, and then do you ever read Plato's Symposium?
Oh yeah, not recently, but yeah, definitely was in college.
Yeah, I haven't read it. I haven't read it since since I was in prison. I read Symposium in prison.
Okay.
But
same thing.
For those of you who haven't read the Symposium, it's Plato's dialogue about a drinking party with philosophers who they get in this big argument about love and everything else, but they're all like drunk, and so they're all giving their different theories, but they're all like fall down drunk, and so it's kind of hilarious while simultaneously they're doing philosophy. All right, you want to go ahead and get into your specific formulation?
Yeah, and I formulated this argument based on some philosophical papers I read to sort of explain why moral realism, objective moral values and duties, leads to a theistic worldview. Mm-hmm. So if you want to put it on the screen.
Yep, I got it up on the screen, so yep, you're good.
Sure. Okay, so basically this is my basic argument. Premise one, morality is a rational enterprise. So what do I mean by that? Well, it's not something we empirically discover. We don't go out and find it in the natural world. It's not science. We don't study it that way. It's a rational enterprise. We study morality through how we think things rationally work. This it seems compatible with moral progress. It seems compatible with our moral intuitions. So it is moral and we ought to do it. That's not a very controversial premise. Most people will accept that. Premise 2, moral realism is true, meaning objective moral values and duties exist. We can spend some more time defending that, but I mean, I'll give you, it's basically, I present a lot of arguments on my channel for this. One is from intuition. So for example, let me just quote Richard Boyd. He says, in the sciences, we decide between theories on the basis of observations, which have an important degree of objectivity. It appears that in moral reasoning, moral intuitions play the same role which observations do in science. We test general moral principles and theories by seeing how their consequences conform to our moral intuitions about particular cases. So we can talk more about that later, but basically it's the idea that objective moral values and duties exist, and there's plenty of arguments to support that. So premise 3, the moral problems and disagreements among humans is too much for us to assume moral values and duties are grounded in a human source of rationality. So again, premise 1, morality is a rational enterprise. Premise 2, morality is something that's objective. But you can't really ground this in humans because, we disagree. We're contingent beings. If it's grounded in us, were moral values and duties still objective before we existed, before you or I existed? Did it change when more humans came into existence? That doesn't seem likely, especially if they're objective. It can't be grounded in contingent beings. So premise 4, moral values and duties are grounded in a necessary rational source. So let me just walk you through this. Premise 1, it's a rational enterprise. And we have to ground it some way when we're talking about moral ontology, but it's also objective. So it's got to be a rational source. And a rational source implies that it's personal because non-sentient objects are not rational, are not personal. And if they're objective, it's probably got to be grounded in a necessary source, something that doesn't change, an unchanging necessary source that's always just been there and just simply can't, change on a whim's notice. This source is what we call God. Now, it's rational. Rational implies personal, and it's necessary, unchanging. So this source is just what we call God, because it just sort of sounds like God is what I've been describing. Conclusion, therefore, God exists. Now, notice I did not say morality or objective moral values and duties just imply God's existence. I said they imply that the source would have to be a necessary rational source. Well, that sort of just sounds like what we call God. So the conclusion is, therefore, God exists. This source we just title God. It just logically follows to the conclusions from the premises.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, which premises? I mean, unless you see objection towards all of them, which premises do you think would be open for objection here?
Well, I mean, I think premise 4 is open for objection because a natural moral realist, someone like Sam Harris, is going to say, well, I don't think moral values and duties are grounded in something like that. They could be grounded in some sort of natural law. And they'll also object to premise 2. They'll say, well, someone could be like a non-cognitivist or a cultural relativist and say, well, I don't think that moral realism is actually true. So those would be the two basic premises I think people would disagree with. Someone might object to premise 1 or 3, but I think most people are going to stick with premises 2 or 4.
Mm-hmm. All right, so if you see any comments challenging you on there, let me know. We can bring that back up. I don't
see so, but we can talk more about some interesting arguments to defend this that Peter S. Williams has put out if you want.
Oh yeah, go on.
So
do you want this up on the screen or?
You can take it down at this point.
Yeah, anytime you want, let me know. Bring it back up. Oh, hang on. One second, because there's a funny comment. Riaz said, atheists believe in a virgin birth, a universe from nothing. I wanted to put that up because I'm going to steal that. Riaz, you might have gotten that from somewhere else, or that might be a popular saying. I hadn't heard of that before, but that's awesome. I'm going to steal that. And I will title a video something like "The Virgin Birth That Even Atheists Believe In," something like that. That's how you title stuff on YouTube. All right, All right, go ahead.
So let's think about moral prescriptions. So we ought not to kill. We ought not to steal. Some people, like Sam Harris, want to say, well, we can ground these in some sort of natural, something natural. Now, there's a problem with there. So when we think of like logic, for example, logic is descriptive. morality is prescriptive, and this is an important distinction. Let me give you an example. I could perfectly logically describe the act of a man killing another man with a knife. I could describe the angle of the arm going down. I could describe the metal that is used in the knife, the point, the tip. I could logically describe everything, maybe even break it down to the mathematics. There is nothing in the logical description that says what he is doing is morally wrong. There's no prescription there. Prescriptions are different than descriptions. But prescriptions seem to be between moral agents. You cannot ground them in like descriptions of reality like the laws of logic could be. If we, like I said. So, for example, Francis J. Beckworth and Greg Kokel said in one of their books, a command only makes sense when there are two minds involved, one giving the command and one receiving it. So if there are objective prescriptions, it only makes sense to ground them in a mind itself, some sort of personal mind that is giving us these prescriptions. So when people say you can ground this in some sort of natural thing, that doesn't make sense because we're talking about objective prescriptions, and they only make sense in terms of one agent talking to another agent, one mind giving a prescription to another mind.
Yeah, there's a little side note here, but I wanted to, because people are wondering about it. Petrus here said, when's the debate with Shermer, or has that not been decided yet?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I have been in contact with David Smalley. He said to message him, what is today? So tomorrow, actually. And so hopefully it will be in about 2 weeks or so. That's what I'm trying to shoot for, sometime during that week. And he posted, for people to know, he posted on Twitter a topic I love to study, which is how does religion affect society? Does it actually hurt society or not? So he posted this tweet about how atheists are actually less racist and and all these other things. And I was like, I'll challenge you on that. Do you want to have a debate? And people started to go crazy and share the tweets a lot. And David Smalley saw it, and he said he'd set it up. So we might be on his podcast, Dogma Debates, debating that topic. If you want context, I debated Aaron Raw on this topic about 8 months ago in Dallas. And there's a debate up on the BBC, the Bible Beer Consortium YouTube channel.
All right. Andrew Martin here says, I'd still like to see this objective morality.
See, but that goes back to my first premise. Yeah. The first premise was morality is a rational enterprise. You don't see rationality.
Yeah, it's like laws of logic. Anyone who challenges the laws of logic is going to fail miserably. You couldn't even formulate a claim against the laws of logic without presupposing the laws of logic and so on. But no one sees them. They're abstract. They're conceptual. They're part of the rational realm rather than the physical realm. And by the way, the stuff we're talking about here. Just to be clear, I have lots of Christian viewers. I have lots of atheist viewers. There are lots of atheists who follow my channel, and we all get along when we're discussing various topics and so on. But on this issue, this is actually a problem for atheists. Lots of times most of the time I deal with issues for Islam or responding to Muslim objections to the gospel and so on. But this is a big problem here, right? You've got this other realm that is not grounded in your sense experience. It's not something that science investigates. This is what IP was talking about, right? You don't find logical laws or moral truths with a telescope. You don't find them with a microscope. And you could also, I think, toss in mathematical truths in here as well. So mathematics, logic, moral truths, these are things that are true everywhere, whether you like them or not. And that should bother you as an atheist because they're not grounded in anything we see around us. And they're true everywhere, right? 2 + 2 = 4 is true in the Andromeda galaxy. You don't get there and find out, it's not true there. They have different rules here in this galaxy. And logical laws would be the same. You could go anywhere in the universe, the logical laws still apply. One debate would be whether moral truths are always going to apply as well. Now, keep in mind, when we're talking about moral truth, we're not saying, hey, everything you happen to believe that's right is an objective moral value. You could believe something is objectively right and still be wrong about that. The point is, if there is anything that is in the category of objective objectively, morally right or wrong, then you've got a problem, because that is not available on your worldview. All you could really say at the end of the day, you either have to ground it in human nature, or you have to ground it in society, and neither one of those is going to give you anything remotely resembling an objective moral value or duty. You just don't get it. It's the way you were wired or the way your society has taught you, but that's not something that would be true despite the way you've been wired or what your society has taught you. So guys, the only point here is, and I'm saying this for you atheists here, even though I know atheists love me. There are atheists who hate all religions so much that they don't like me either, but lots of atheists out there really like D. Wood. I've had many atheists on the show with me: Armin Navabi, Abdullah Samir, the Apostate Prophet. We get on here, we talk about the things we agree with and the things we don't agree with. But guys, this is a problem, because even those of you who don't have any problem with Christians, like the Apostate Prophet, he doesn't have any problem with Christians. He believes that Islam is wrong and dangerous, and so he responds to Islam. But so even if you're something like that and you think, hey, we have to deal with Islam because it's so bad, if you believe it's really bad, if you believe that not just, hey, I don't like it and therefore I'm going to respect, if you believe that Islam teaches things that are objectively, morally wrong, then you've got a problem, because that's not available on your worldview. If you think it is, then I'd be interested in seeing how you ground it. If it's, you have to say it's going somehow against the way you're wired or against your societal norms, or you have to say, no, I've got this other explanation of why this is really, really morally wrong. And so I'd be interested in seeing that. But guys, we're pointing out, all of us hopefully are in the same position of trying to come to a rational position about the world around us and so on. Well, guess what? One of the things we have to deal with is the status of our moral claims, our moral views. What are these grounded in? And so that's what we're getting at now. Go ahead, IP.
So, if you want to know more about different meta-ethical positions, the way people try to explain morality, I have a whole series on my channel on meta-ethics. Like, I have a video called A Critique of Non-Cognitivism, which is another view, a critique of moral relativism, a critique of error theory, a critique of natural moral realism. That's Sam Harris's view. And so I sort of critique a lot of those views right there. How we ground it is a little different than that. That's moral ontology. They're trying different types of views and whatnot. But I would add to this is that what a lot of atheists tried to do is they just tried to say, well, objective moral values and duties don't exist. And as you were mentioning, there's a lot of problems with that because it contradicts their experience. And so one of the ways we sort of argue for that is by arguing for different presenting different arguments that moral facts are actually objective. For example, this is just the way they manifest in reality. Compare it to your preference with ice cream flavor. That doesn't manifest in an objective way. Who cares if someone has a different preference for ice cream flavor? It's completely different than how a moral fact manifests in reality. And so some atheists, like I did when I debated Cosmic Skeptic on this, he argued that evolution just sort of gave us these ideas that these were objective moral facts, that they are objective. And I said, I'm paraphrasing, I didn't say this exactly, but I basically said, well, that doesn't make sense because one of the things that was important for our evolution was certain things to eat, certain things to taste. Like we didn't develop a taste for, feces because that contained a lot of harmful things that could kill us. So why didn't that manifest in our evolutionary history to mean that we objectively thought taste preferences were true? Mm-hmm. They just didn't manifest that way. Taste preferences are subjective. Who cares if someone likes certain flavors other than you? Mm-hmm. But moral facts have manifested objectively. And arguments from even atheists like Thomas Nagel, Ruth Schaefer-Landau, David Brink, Kai Nelson have argued that this is because they actually are objective. And so when I argue for objective morality, I don't have to do so by arguing from Christians. Mm-hmm. There are a lot of atheist philosophers that believe morality is objective. They just disagree on how it's grounded. Mm. And so when I'm getting into metaethics, I actually rely a lot on atheist philosophers because it's so easy to argue that morality is objective. Mm. And a lot of atheist philosophers even agree.
I think there's an additional problem for for atheists they when they believe that there are objective moral truths, and they'll defend them. By the way, usually how that goes, you mentioned earlier the idea that we're saying that you can't behave morally or something like that. That seems to be, as soon as you bring this argument up, it always seems to, that straw man, someone goes right for that straw man. Oh, you're saying that atheists can't live in this way. You're saying that atheists can't be good or something like that. No. No. If you're an atheist, you can live in exactly the same way I do. We're saying that the very statements, this is good or this is bad, I don't know what they mean, right? If there is an objective standard of what is good, and things that aren't in line with that are bad, then I know what it means for something to be good and bad. If you're telling me that, we're wired the way we're wired because our grandparents, way back, our distant ancestors managed to hump more successfully and raise more offspring and find food better and kill their enemies more successfully. Therefore, the way they were wired, that's passed on to us, is good. I don't know what you mean there, right? Because we could have been wired in all kinds of ways. Just imagine a world right now. This is called a thought experiment, right? Imagine a world. Imagine a completely different world where you have men and women, but imagine that women in that world experience some sort of genetic mutation, and that genetic mutation made them hate having sex, and all the women in that world just refused to have sex. It became like the most horrifying thing imaginable to them, right? So just imagine that, right? That's something that could happen in some possible world, right? Just women, there's this massive genetic mutation, and women absolutely just hate sex. Who would reproduce in that world? Rapists, right?
I knew you, yeah.
Rapists would be the ones who pass on their offspring in that world, because, people who don't believe in rape would not reproduce because women didn't want to reproduce. So the rapists would reproduce. But notice, then each generation is going to be the result of rape, right? And so the people, the men who are sort of wired to be rapists, they pass on their offspring. Well, guess what? The most successful people in passing on their offspring are going to be the most successful rapists, right? If that guy doesn't rape anyone, then he's not passing on his genetics at all. If this guy rapes one woman, then he passes on his genetic information a little bit. If this guy rapes 100 women, he passes on his genetic information to 100 people. So each generation is going to be, the people in each generation are going to be continuing this process, but the result from an evolutionary perspective would be more and more prolific rapists as time goes on, right? Because the more obsessed you are with rape, the more you're going to pass on your genetic material, and so the more your descendants are going to be represented in future populations. So think about this: the future generations after this has been going on for thousands of years are going to be the most epic rapists who've ever lived. And if you ask them, hey, what's right? Well, they may say, oh, rape is right. And I say, what? Rape is horrible. And you say, what? It's responsible for our entire culture and our entire society. And this is how we live. And without it, we would have died out thousands of years ago. That may be true. But is that what makes something right or wrong? If you say, well, that would make it right because, that's how they preserve their offspring and that's the way they're wired. It's a very, very strange claim to make, but that's the sort of bullet. That's the sort of bullet you have to bite. And so you basically have going back to what I was mentioning, when you bring up the moral argument, the first thing is, what? You're saying we can't be good? No, you can live exactly the way everyone else lived. You can live. The question is, why would you want to? Why do you think you have a moral obligation? Let me use a different example. Imagine a society where there's where they worship a frog god, right? They worship a cosmic frog. And so as they worship that cosmic frog, they all try to act like frogs, right? And they hop on down to the pond, and they sit on lily pads and they eat flies, right? Now imagine sometime after that, some people come along who don't believe in that frog god, right? They don't believe in that. And so the objection comes up, hey, you're rejecting the frog god. How are you gonna live like the rest of us? And they say, what? We can live exactly like the rest of you. We can hop down to the pond too. We can sit on a lily pad all day. We can eat flies. Well, yeah, you are capable of doing the exact same things, but what is the point? Once you've thrown that out, once you've thrown out the idea of a frog god, what's the point of doing all that stuff, right? So that's kind of what we're saying, right? Is if people historically, whether theists or whether they have some other position that can ground objective moral values and duties, if those people believe that certain things are right and wrong, and they believe that we have moral obligations and so on, and then you throw out everything that objective moral values and duties were grounded in, and you say, but I can still live the same way. The question is, yeah, you can live the exact same way, but what's the status of those things? You're just saying, hey, we can live like people who believe that these things are objective. We can live by the same rules, even though we believe they're not objective. And so that's kind of the point we're making. We're saying your position is incoherent. You're saying we should all live this way, even though there is no should in our worldview. And so that's kind of the problem. All right. Got some stuff you want to add there?
Yeah, let's move on to another objection that atheists try to use. It's called the Euthyphro dilemma. It's a popular objection. It goes back to Plato. And what it basically is something good because God...
One second. Because before we jump in, I'm trying to get basically trying to get in a couple comments in between our points. But these are for you, so I wanted to bring those up real quick.
Okay, sure.
Can't wait for IP to debate with Matt Dillahunty on the resurrection. That is going to be amazing. A couple people mentioned Matt Dillahunty. So are you debating Matt Dillahunty?
Yeah, probably twice. Probably once in January live in Austin, and then I'm going to be debating him probably in April on the resurrection on Capturing Christianity channel. It's not going to be the same resurrection debate he's done. I'm going to try to hone in on his philosophical objections, not the objections to the historical data.
Mm-hmm. And someone also asked, David, when are you debating Matt Dillahunty? Whenever anyone wants to set it up. I've pointed this out before, that there are tons of colleges across the country, and there are atheist groups and Christian groups in those colleges. So anyone wants to see it, go ahead and set it up and then get back to us. All right, Euthyphro dilemma.
Yeah. So Euthyphro dilemma is when someone asks, is something good because God says it is good, or does God say it is good because it is good?
No, by the way, that's the formulation that's used against Christians, because the way it appears actually in Plato's dialogue, the Euthyphro, is a little bit different because they were dealing with polytheism, and so it gets brought up. But wait, don't the gods fight among themselves? And if so, if they fight amongst themselves, and who do you know who's right? And so anyway, so that's how it was used actually by Plato. But this gets thrown at theists in this way. Go ahead.
Right. So they basically say, is God just sort of is he arbitrarily setting moral values and duties? Is he deciding, well, I'll decide that this is good and I'll decide that is good? Or is he saying things are good because he's conforming to a moral standard? Mm-hmm. That's the basic argument. So it kind of puts this dichotomy up. You got to pick one or the other. Mm-hmm. And so the basic response to this is what they're doing is it's a false dichotomy. They're saying these are the only two options. Mm-hmm. And what I try to argue is it's false. God is the good. God simply is the standard. He simply is that. So think of it like this. Here's an analogy. You and your personality. Okay, so think of you as the conscious agent and your personality. Your personality is grounded in you, but it is still something that is sort of kind of abstract. It's containing your thoughts, your emotions, your dreams, all these things. But it's grounded in you, and it still makes you who you are. Likewise, God is the good is grounded in God, but he is the good. So when chemists discovered what water was H2O, they didn't merely stipulate that one was the other. Rather, they discovered that terms meant the same thing. So I simply say God is the good. This is we see in the similar to what we see in the first epistle from John, that God is love. So it's not like God, it's not like these are two separate things. He's trying to say that God simply is love, and I say God is the love. When we investigate into what the nature of the good is, we discover it shares the same properties of what monotheists refer to when we say God. It goes back to my argument. The necessary rational source is what we title God. It's just simply the same thing. Mm-hmm. And so that's how you avoid the Euthyphro dilemma. Yeah,
guys, so we want you to understand this, because if you don't have any sort of background in philosophy, like not even an intro class or something like that, some of these things can be difficult to get your minds around. So let us know if you're understanding these. But that's why we're laying out the arguments and putting them up on the screen and so on. The Euthyphro dilemma. The Euthyphro dilemma. I mean, that's something that philosophers still discuss. 2,400 years after Plato. it's still put forward as an objection to theism. But think about that. Think through that. Think about what IP said there. But think about this. So just going back, because I want you to understand. I want you to understand what the actual problem is. And I'm just saying from experience, because I used to teach this in class. Lots of students just would not get it. They would not get it. You have to think about it for a while. But if God says this is good, is it good because God's saying it? In which case, God could have said anything. He could have said torturing old ladies for fun is good, and that would make it good. So is it good just because God said it? Or is God saying that such and such is good, helping old ladies across the street? Is God saying that that's good because God recognizes it as good? And he's looking at it and says, wow, that's a good thing to do. He's saying that it matches up with some standard of goodness. But notice, in which case, then there's something separate from God that is the standard of good. That's the standard of good. And he's saying he's looking at what's good and recognizing things as good because he recognizes the standard. So that's called a dilemma. We use lots of dilemmas. I have the Islamic dilemma and stuff like that. But a dilemma is where you basically got two ways to go, and you're in trouble either way. So atheists think, well, we've got these guys here. Is something good because God says it, in which case God could have said anything is good, could have been something totally different. Or is God saying it's good because he sees that he recognizes it as good, in which case the standard is outside of God. And IP pointed out those are not the only options there, right? If God within his nature is the standard of good, then it's not merely God just saying anything that he might say. It's goodness is part of his nature. So yeah, so notice we're 46 minutes into this. We'll probably go on for we'll probably close out at 9, and then we'll basically check the interest. If people want us to discuss more philosophical issues, we'll be happy to come back and do some more. But you've already been through several classes of your first year of philosophy here, just in these issues. The moral argument, that would be a day of class, and the Euthyphro dilemma, that would be a day in philosophy class, and so on. Someone had a question here for you.
Mm-hmm.
This might be wildly off base, but someone said, IP, would you ever debate a topic about Islam or debate a Muslim apologist, or is that just something you're not interested in?
Maybe in the future. Right now I'm really focusing in on defending Christianity itself. I could debate a topic related to Christianity with Muslim, like the resurrection argument. Mm-hmm. Other issues related. It's just not what I've had a chance to study a lot of.
Yeah.
When I'm done going through the Old Testament, I'll probably focus on Islam more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of my view. I get requests all the time. I've mentioned this before. I get requests all the time to make videos about all sorts of other topics like Hinduism and Buddhism. And my view is normally, guys, I don't study that stuff a lot. I did in college. I was required to take classes on those things because my first degree was philosophy with an emphasis in religious studies. So I just take a lot of classes on religious studies, but I really don't like talking about things unless I study them a lot. So. Yeah, so I study Islam, I study Christianity, I have a background in philosophy, so I don't mind talking about that. But yeah, and that's the way it should be, right? If you want to be really good at something, you can't focus on everything, right? You've got to focus on a few things if you want to be really good. All right. I wanted to pull up one more sort of version of the argument because this is more along the lines of, I wanted to give everyone how I think about issues, and this will be another class of philosophy right now, but this is kind of different. So this is a Bayesian argument. Now, so this is going to look confusing. Guess what? You can all get this right now. You can all get this because I'm going to explain all of this right now. So you have the moral argument for the existence of God. So to do that successfully, you have to argue that there are objective moral values and duties, and you have to argue that God is the ground. God is required as the ground of those objective moral values and duties. So the question is how you do that. I think it's actually much easier to use the moral argument as... Now, keep in mind, I do believe in the moral argument. I do believe that the moral argument for the existence of God, if you formulate it properly, is an awesome argument. But I think it's easier to present as an argument against naturalism, which is sort of the... naturalism is just the claim that the natural world is all that exists, right? So you could in theory be an atheist while while still believing in something supernatural, right? I mean, if you believed in a unicorn and it had supernatural powers or something like that, then you would be an atheist if you didn't believe in God, but you wouldn't be a naturalist if you believe in something that has supernatural powers. So naturalism is what lots of atheists actually are. They just believe that the natural world is all that exists, and then atheism is just, that's their view of God. So this would be an argument against naturalism, against the claim that the natural world is all that exists. So this mainly the second premise there with the symbols and stuff on it, that looks complicated. It's not at all. That's just how we symbolize things. But notice, so O stands for objective moral values and duties exist. T stands for theism, N stands for naturalism. And so you put those in there, and basically, one, O obtains, that's just the fancy philosopher's language of saying that O is true. Objective moral values and duties actually do exist. Two, that's the one that looks tricky but actually isn't. That just stands for the probability of objective moral values and duties existing given theism. In other words, on the assumption that theism is true, whether it's true or not, just assuming that theism is true, the probability of there being objective moral values and duties that exist given theism is much greater. And so that's the greater sign with an exclamation point. And so that means much greater. Philosophers also can write it as sort of two greater than signs. That also means much greater. But it's much greater than the probability of objective moral values and duties existing if naturalism is true. Right? So all this is saying is, if theism is true, the probability of objective moral values and duties existing is very, very high, because theism would include the idea of a supreme moral lawgiver and so on. So the probability is going to be very high. It's going to be 1. And so it's much greater than the probability of objective moral values and duties existing on the assumption that naturalism is true. If naturalism were true, we would not expect anything remotely resembling objective moral values and duties. So notice, even if atheists want to suspect that there's some way they can ground objective moral values and duties in the natural world, this is still true, because the idea is that the probability of doing that would be very, very low, whereas the probability of objective moral values and duties on theism would be very, very high. And so the conclusion there, notice, if you say, hey, there are objective moral values and duties, and the probability of there being objective moral values and duties is much higher on theism than it is on naturalism, then if everything else were equal, naturalism would probably be false. And so that's a Bayesian argument. Notice that's different from something like modus ponens or modus tollens, syllogisms and deductive logic. Bayesian reasoning is different. It's arguing in terms of probability and how evidence affects our confidence in hypotheses and things like that. So notice that this argument right here wouldn't prove that naturalism is false. It would simply be saying that naturalism that objective moral values and duties are evidence against naturalism, because there would be a more probable hypothesis. And so what the naturalist would have to do, and that, by the way, a naturalist, if you're an atheist and a naturalist, you believe that the natural world is all that exists, you don't believe in anything supernatural, I don't see why you wouldn't grant this, right? I mean, everything here I would say is obviously true, but I find there are lots of atheists who don't want to grant anything, right? Don't want to grant anything. I would say if I were an atheist, I would grant, if I also believe that certain things are really right and really wrong. In other words, if I were being totally honest, I would say, of course this is true, but other things aren't equal, and we just have all this evidence for naturalism or something like this that outweighs this evidence. So the question would be, what other considerations would outweigh this sort of thing? And basically, the conclusion there, other things equal, naturalism is probably false. You could be an atheist and grant that. You could say, yes, if other things were equal, naturalism would probably be false, but other things aren't equal because of these other considerations. And the general directions to go there would be, you could argue that naturalism is more intrinsically probable than theism. So just, the concept of naturalism is just simpler and has less packed into it than theism. And so it's intrinsically more probable than theism. I think you're going to fail there, because people point out that theism has a specific, I'm trying not to use difficult words here, but theism has a specific ontological commitment. In other words, theism is saying that one very specific thing exists. And, naturalism doesn't have that thing. So theism is more specific, but naturalism has a ton of negative ontological commitments, meaning that naturalism says a ton of things don't exist, namely anything that is supernatural. And so I would put them kind of in the same ballpark as far as their intrinsic probability. And so the question is, what other evidence is there that could show that naturalism is true and that theism is false? And I don't think you've got anything, because basically you could put together a ton of arguments exactly like this, that the existence of the universe is much more probable on theism than it is on naturalism, that the fine-tuning of the universe is much more probable on theism than it is on naturalism, that the existence of life is much more probable on theism than it is on naturalism, that logical laws are much more probable on theism than they are on naturalism, that moral values, that mathematical truths, that all of these different kinds of things, that the evidence we have for the resurrection, you could argue that all these things are much more probable on theism than they are on naturalism. And so you end up with a ton of evidence. And, at the end of the day, what do you have for naturalism? You got, problem of evil or something like that. And anyway, going to be
There's not a lot of evidence for naturalism.
Yeah.
You don't really. It's really interesting. A lot of naturalists just sort of just assume that's the default, and then they don't think they have to argue, and they just sort of deny that the theist has given sufficient evidence for their position. It's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So we'll probably just go a few more minutes. Hey,
I could bring up this.
Someone. Yeah. No, that'd be good. That's a book I've started several times, and someone here said, Nab Hugh Manu said, I admit. Sounds like he's admitting that we're right. If so, that's cool. But yeah, talk about that book. That's a book I've read like half of multiple times, but then I always, the 2 or 3 times I've started is at least 3 times. Matter of fact, it's probably 3 or 4 times that I've started it. Like halfway through the book, I've always been distracted by some other emergency thing that I have to read, and then so it got set aside. But what I have read in that book was absolutely phenomenal, and why that's relevant, because this guy's an atheist. So go ahead.
Yeah, there's Thomas Nagel's book, Minding Cosmos, and he's arguing that on purely naturalistic views, that that view cannot explain things like the origin of space-time, cognition, consciousness, and value. And so he responds to a paper by someone named Sharon Street and argues that on a purely naturalistic, Darwinian-type view, that you would have to abandon moral realism, objective moral values and duties. And he says, yeah, I agree, but I'm not abandoning objective moral values and duties, even though he's an atheist. Mm-hmm. And so he says, in brief, on page 123, he says, in brief, value is not just an accidental side effect of life. Rather, there is life because life is a necessary condition of value. And so he's arguing that whatever value is, it must have gone into something to create what we have for life here. But he's not a theist, but he's acknowledging that a lot of the implications that we use to argue for theism have to be true. And so it's actually one of those kind of a shocker books. He's not a theist because he says in his book, The Last Word, he doesn't want God to exist. He's got subjective or emotional objections to it, which I think he's very honest in admitting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that is, and I'm saying this because, gosh, you could make an entire video series out of some of the points that Nagel makes in that book. Mm-hmm. That is some awesome stuff. I wanted to bring up one more problem that I see that I'd like to make a video out of, that I've used occasionally in debates with atheists, but and then you can close out with any thoughts. But the problem I see with atheists who want to cling to the idea of objective moral values, not necessarily all atheists, but the more aggressive ones, is that they're being completely inconsistent in their methodology, right? And what I mean here is that when we start talking about the existence of God, it'll be, but I don't see God. I don't see any evidence for God. You can't provide me an airtight argument for God's existence. If you provide me any argument for God's existence, I'll just, no, I'm going to say it's not good evidence. It's not good evidence. It's not good evidence for me. You could do the exact same thing with any moral claim anyone has ever made, right? If I say torturing old ladies for fun is wrong, and you say that is objectively wrong, I say, well, show me that. Give me any evidence that that is true beyond your feelings, right? Guess what? An atheist can never do that. So if they were to be consistent, if an atheist were to be consistent and apply the same standard there, he'd have to say, well, there's no evidence that I could really lay out. There's no evidence that I could give to a skeptic. In other words, if you were a skeptic who says, I'm not going to believe anything until you give me really, really good evidence that it's true. What evidence are you going to give that it's really, really true, that it's wrong to torture old ladies for fun? What evidence are you going to give a skeptic? And so basically what I've seen from atheists is this ever-shifting standard, right? It's when we're talking about theism, the bar goes up to, they dial it all the way up to 10, right? And so in which case, it's just absolutely nothing will be considered evidence. Nothing will be considered good enough. But then when lots of atheists, and again, I'm not talking about all atheists here, just, especially lots of ones on the internet and lots of the ones who have YouTube channels and stuff like that. But then if they're talking about something they happen to believe in already, right? Like if they believe in objective moral values and duties, they'll give some incredibly weak argument that would never last 5 seconds against a genuine skeptic. And so what they do is they're adjusting their levels of skepticism depending on whether they want to believe something or not. In which case, it's not a matter of the evidence, it's a matter of their will, right? So if you present something they don't want to believe in, then they'll say, prove it to me. And they'll dial their skepticism all the way up to 10, and then they'll become like extreme skeptics, and no evidence you give them will be good enough. But if you challenge them on their moral claims and say, well, what's the foundation of that? They say, what kind of monster would do that? We all know that this is good. We all know that we all know it, right? And notice they would never accept anything like that from theism, right? In other words, how do they actually know that something is wrong and something is right? It's coming down to their feelings. Well, guess what? If a theist says, I feel the presence of God, they would say that's no evidence whatsoever. It's none, it's zero. But suddenly, if they feel like something is right or wrong, it's beyond dispute. And there's just this massive level of hypocrisy going on. So that's kind of my view. If you want to be consistent, if an atheist wants to be consistent, he should not only reject the existence of God, but reject a lot of other things that he believes in, because applying the same level of skepticism, he's going to have to reject all kinds of things. Or if he wants to believe in things like moral values, then my goodness, if he's allowing those kinds of claims to be true, you have a much greater case for the existence of God, because that's based on a ton of information rather than just one specific thing. All right, those are my thoughts. So, all right, AP, let's go ahead. Take all the time you want. If you want to take 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or whatever, just go through any additional thoughts or respond to any comments you wanted to respond to.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. Don't play the atheist game. When they say, well, that doesn't convince me, what they're doing is they're trying to set themselves up at the standard. The only way the theists can be right is if you convince them. Don't play that game. What I tend to say is when an atheist says that doesn't convince them, after I've given evidence for God's existence, after I've given arguments, I say, that's fine. You can believe whatever you want. I don't really care. I have given evidence, and I've given what I said is the best explanation, which is theism. If you can't offer something better, if you can't offer a better explanation, I'm justified in saying this is the best explanation of reality, and you can go ahead and just believe whatever you want. And that drives them up a wall. I hate that. But don't play their game. Just say, look, I have made the case. You need to either offer a better explanation or show there's an issue here. And the fact you haven't done that is not an argument. And so that's what I try to do. There was one comment I will respond to. They said, how do you get around the consistent atheist
yeah, I saw that too. I'm looking at that right now. So
yeah, they said, how do you get around?
Got it up on the screen now.
Good. How do you get around the consistent atheist says moral standards are just feelings we develop for social cooperation and good for the herd? That tends to be a view called non-cognitivism. And what you tend to argue is you have to argue that that's just simply that's not how moral values and duties manifest in reality. There's a lot of good arguments that they manifest objectively. You can check out the videos on my channel that argue for moral realism. You can see my video, Critique of Non-Cognitivism, which shows there's a lot of problems with that view. But for example, you could argue from moral progress. You could say that this is actually an argument philosophers put forward, that society is sort of advancing in the same way we're advancing in terms of scientific progress. We're getting better at understanding what scientific laws are. And in the same way, we're getting better at understanding what objective moral values and duties are. 2,000 years ago, crucifixion was a normal standard thing. Today, it's condemned, and you can't do it according to the Geneva Convention. That's progress. We have a better understanding of what morality actually is. We're not making it up. We're discovering it. And there's all sorts of other arguments you can use, like arguing from intuition, the basic understanding of how morality implies justice, that it doesn't manifest in subjective ways like taste preferences do. I would use those types of arguments.
I would probably just pile up example after example after example. So you're saying
that works too.
Yeah, you're saying that this couple who raped and tortured this little girl over a period of days and then strangled her to death as she was begging for her life, that there's nothing actually morally wrong about that. You just have a taste preference against it, and if we had developed differently, then there, we might see that as great, something like that, right? I would just keep piling up examples because, if you're one on one, and the person is saying no, there's actually nothing wrong with what Hitler did. There's actually nothing wrong with what Stalin did. There's actually nothing wrong with what Pol Pot did. There's actually nothing wrong with what Jeffrey Dahmer did, or Ted Bundy did, or Charles Manson did. There's nothing really wrong with all these things. It's just, moral standards are just the feelings we develop for social cooperation and good of the herd. So notice, given that view, when you have people who don't have those feelings, and I'm saying this because I am someone who doesn't have those feelings. I'm a psychopath, right? So I can recognize that things are right and wrong. I can say, hey, so-and-so did that. That is unjust. Or I did that horrible thing, and I recognize that I should not have done that. I have no feeling about it, right? It's all right here. It's all me recognizing, hey, that is something that I should not be allowed to do. But my understanding of right and wrong is grounded in Christian theism, right? It's, hey, here's the guy who rose from the dead. So if he's saying something, if he's saying, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you, things like that, well, then I need to understand if I don't feel that way, then I'm just defective in somehow. And so I need to go ahead and do what he says. Anyway, so notice, given that, if I say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, the golden rule, I can recognize that and say, well, I would not want that person doing that to me. I would be enraged if he did that to me. Therefore, I should not be doing that to him. I can have moral reasoning. But there's never a feeling about anything I've done. What I mean here is I know what anger and rage are, right? I can be angry, and in other words, before I was a Christian, I could be enraged at something that someone else is doing. I have no feeling of guilt. Whatever you guys mean by guilt and remorse, I've never felt it once in my entire life. There's no bad feeling after I do anything. The only thing I have is some sort of intellectual recognition that is not something I was allowed to do. And therefore I need to modify my behavior so that I don't do that. But there's no feelings. And so notice, given what you're saying here, if that's all morality is, are these feelings, then when someone doesn't have those feelings, that person has no obligation to do those things because he doesn't even have those feelings. Now you could say, well, the mob will still just, stop him and throw him in jail or kill him if he doesn't do those things. But none of that has anything to do with right or wrong. Whereas what we're saying is, whether you have those feelings or whether you don't have those feelings, you still have to do certain things because certain things are right. So certain things are right for the psychopath, certain things are right for the sociopath, certain things are right across the board for everyone. And if that's true, atheists have a pretty huge problem there, whereas that fits in perfectly with theism. All right. Any final thoughts, IP?
Nope, I think we covered it all. I think this is a good place to start. It's a good introduction to the moral argument, how to defend it.
Mm-hmm. Hang on, one more comment here. David and IP, what do you think of other Christian YouTubers like the Bible Project, and where was Jesus in between the crucifixion and the resurrection? These will kind of be off topic, but you want to answer any of that?
Yeah, I like them.
Okay.
I mean, I promote others like What Do You Meme, Capturing Christianity.
Yeah, I don't
all
know,
those guys.
I don't know the Bible Project. I haven't watched any videos, so I can't.
They're pretty good.
Okay.
Yeah. Where was Jesus between the crucifixion and the resurrection? I would argue that he was with the Father. Because he said to the thief on the cross, today you will be with me in paradise. I don't think he went to hell and got tortured like you see with the Joyce Meyer crowd or any of the prosperity gospel people. That is an argument they put out there. I think Jesus did descend into hell, but it wasn't until after the resurrection and after the ascension. I think in those few days, Jesus was with the Father.
And that, notice, either way, that would not be a resurrected Jesus, right? I mean, right here, this would not be a resurrected. So between the crucifixion and the resurrection, so this would be some sort of incorporeal, some bodiless spirit rather than the physical Jesus. So in case everyone, the resurrection, for those of you who haven't studied this before, the resurrection is actually when your body is raised up, right? So that's when your body is raised up. So Christians, Muslims, we believe in a future resurrection, which means even actually after you die, whether your soul sleeps or whether it goes off to be somewhere, something like that, it's eventually reunited with your body in some sort of supernatural state. All right, gosh, there's a lot more comments here, but these seem to be a lot of these seem to be off topic. Yeah, we want to go ahead and get off here, but wait, hang on.
If you wanna see stuff on digital physics, I got a bunch of videos on it on my channel.
Yeah, that's what I was looking at. All right, so everyone, so we hope you got a good idea of the moral argument and a couple versions of it and responses to some of the objections on it. This is meant to be an introduction. There obviously could be atheists who have further objections and so on, but we want to start getting some of these arguments. Since we have pretty big YouTube channels, we want to start getting these arguments out there, mainly up for discussion. All right, so IP, what can help? I've got you in the description box. I've got your channel in the description box, but go ahead and tell everyone anyway how to follow you and get in touch with you.
Yeah, you can follow me youtube.com/InspiringPhilosophy. I'm on Facebook a lot. Same link, facebook.com/InspiringPhilosophy. I have a Patreon. You go there and donate. Yeah, all my videos are released early, and we're going to start this month doing a private Q&As for all Patreon supporters, and I'll also go over a lot of the research I'm going over for future videos. I got a very big video planned for March that we will have a lot of research a lot of people have not heard of.
Mm-hmm. And just so everyone knows, here, I'm a Christian YouTuber. IP is a Christian YouTuber. Vocab Malone is. John McCrae is. Mike Winger is. Bobby Conway, who's the 1 Minute Apologist, is. And we met together out in California and decided we are gonna start networking and planning and being more organized in our approach to YouTube. And so keep your eyes out for that. We're going to be getting together. We're going to be sharing any insights we have on what works on YouTube and stuff, and basically try to build up a massive generation of Christian apologists on YouTube. So thanks everyone for joining us. Thanks to IP, and we'll catch y'all later.